Welcome everybody to the July 22nd, wow, time flies, Professional VMware vBrownbag US edition. Tonight we're talking Section 1 security on the VCP6-DCV. Just some show notes. You can join in on the conversation using the vBrownbag hashtag or chime in the GoToMeeting window. Don't forget we have other shows going on globally, so check those out or download them via iTunes or directly at professionalvmware.com. Don't forget also we do have tech talks going on at VMworld, so please go out and sign up if you plan on attending VMworld this year, both US and EMEA. Tonight's guest is James Brown. You can find him at jbcompvm on Twitter. I'm your host, Ahmad Yunus. Find me at Ahmad_Yunus on Twitter as well. And with that, you now have control.
All right, hold on here 1 second. There we go. Hopefully I got this right. So we've got the VCP-DCV6, configuring and administering vSphere security. As I was introduced, James Brown at jbcompvm. I also have a blog that's out at jbcomp.com. As I was talking to the guys earlier, if you follow anything on Twitter, I actually just got done with the Virtual Design Master. I'm actually one of those contestants as of right now. I actually made it to round 4, and there is one more round after this. So I'm still a little up in arms and kind of excited. So I'll try and keep my talking to a calmness. So we'll jump into Objective 1. It's really easy security-wise. There's not a lot. Actually, I just installed the vSphere 6, so I'm kind of I've got a pile of notes sitting here that I'll be helping you guys along with also. So it's identify common vSphere server privileges and roles, describe how permissions are applied inherited in vCenter, view, sort, export users and groups list, add, modify, remove permissions for users and groups on vCenter server inventory objects, create, clone, edit vSphere server roles, determine the correct roles privileges needed to integrate vCenter server with VMware products, determine the appropriate sets of privileges for common tasks. So the biggest piece is the common roles, and I'm sure a lot of us as VM admins have seen these before. The administrator role itself is basically the God user. It does just about everything. The read-only user is basically the view-only privileges. This is kind of given to those users that you just want to be able to show metrics and show that everything's running, but not actually physically be able to go in and shut down anything or mess up the environment the way it sits. The no access itself, you can actually take control to where, hey, I've got an administrator that actually left. I can go in and set no access, so when he tries, he can't even get connected to the server itself. There's this new piece called tagging admins. It's a very new role. I'll try and explain it as we go through, but it's kind of a neat concept. As it shows, any user and group assigned as a role can create, tag, assign or unassign tags, delete tags, edit tags, create, modify, all that fun stuff with categories. So this is kind of one of the new features with 6 that you'll have to learn for the VCP. So several other examples. We've got recess pools, virtual machines, consolidated backup users. All of these kind of go around what's needed. If you've got a network admin that you need in, their only accesses into the network systems, the data source systems, and pieces like that. So I'm not going to disappoint the community. We'll actually go straight into the actual lab itself. So the first piece I want to hit on here, let me minimize this. So I've got a small actual lab here. I'm just going to explain a little bit of how permissions are actually applied and inherited. It's a pretty simple term coming from a networking background and anything else like that, but it can be very high level. So I've actually got the old physical client sitting here, and I'm only going to use it for this view so I can kind of show what I'm actually meaning here. So as you can see, I've got my vCenter, which is sitting there. I'll bring it out. I've actually got one actual data center, and then I got multiple cluster here. I got a lab cluster, and I'm actually testing the Nutanix Community Edition on this piece. So my lab cluster, you can actually see that I've got my full-blown 2 vSphere set up with actual multiples. So inheritance is just kind of like Windows. It inherits from the top down, the top being vCenter. So if you want someone to have permissions across everything, the permission gets set in vCenter. So you can go down further than this and go, okay, I only want someone to be able to get into, you can see on my screen DC1. I only want someone that can get in, reboot that machine, and make changes to it. You can actually go all the way down to the VM level and actually make permission changes. So that's kind of how inheritance works. It always goes from the top down. All right, so we're going to jump out of the client and go back to the virtual, or go back to the web client. So the web client is here. I'll actually go back one more step. This kind of messed me up when I actually got 6 up and running here a couple days ago. If you're still used to 5.5, you'll notice it says vCenter inventory list and not vCenter as it used to. They actually created the inventory list that actually has everything under it. So you can see vCenter, virtual machines, vApps. It's just a different way of phasing it. So what we'll do is we'll actually just set a permission quick. So I'll go in here and we'll just set a vCenter permission. Go into vCenter itself. Usually you'll get into the Getting Started tab. The Manage tab is actually where you find most of your pieces. Permissions is basically where we want to set. And as you can see, everything is kind of basic. The only thing that I've done is actually gone in and set, okay, here's my domain admins. Anybody that's in the domain admin group, which we'll get to here in a little bit, is a part of that. So what we can actually do is if we hit the green plus button, it'll come up and say, okay, what do you want to do? You have privileges such as, like I said, the administrator read-only. There's a couple new ones in there, the data center users, tagging admins. There's a whole bunch of pieces in there. So what we'll do is we'll actually create what's called a read-only user. And I'm going to actually go in here and hit the add button. In the domain piece, you can actually create local, or if you've got it tied into an identity source, such as a domain, you can actually choose and say, okay, I want it to actually be on my domain. Because my name is James Brown, I figured the easiest way was to call my domain JB. So I go into here, and I've got a couple of users already set up. I have a read-only user, and I have a Testy McNasty. I've used this for probably about 6 years. It's just a way for me to tell that, hey, I guarantee that this is a test user not being used. So I will go ahead and select the read-only, hit the OK button, and we'll hit it one more time. And pretty much simply, you can see that that domain user, which the JB/read-only, that user is set to read-only. You can show that this object and all child objects. So what that says is it's been done from the vCenter all the way down. If I were to actually right-click on this and do a change roles, you'll see at the very bottom here to where it says description, all privileges, it says propagate to the children. So basically what it's saying is it's going all the way down. I actually haven't looked at this piece yet. So you can actually choose all the way down where you can actually go. On this level, I'm okay with vCenter being the read-only rights across the board. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create one more user, and I'm going to bring out my Testy user. So I'm going to go ahead and get Testy added as a user here. And I'm going to basically tell him that he is read-only, but I don't want him to go any further down. So he'll only be vCenter only that he's got actual read-only rights on. So you can see in here when we put Testy in, the read-only rights are shown in the role, and then the defined in is it's only this object. So it will not go any further, it will not go down to the data centers, or will not go down to the clusters any further than that. All right. Now I got to see where I'm at in my notes. All right, so that actually takes care of the first piece of our topic. So we'll go on to the next piece, which is view, sort, export users, and group lists. So I'm reading off my notes here so I remember how to do this. So it's actually in the same exact place. We're in the Manage, we're in the Permissions tab. And there's actually, in the very bottom right-hand corner, is this little piece right beside the 10 items there. It's a little bitty piece, and I know this was in 5.5.2. It's pretty simple and easy. If you actually hit that, you get a couple different pieces. You can export the selected items. You can export all. You can copy it to a clipboard, or you can copy it all. Depending on where you're at, you may want to copy the permissions from the top. Knowing how I do it in the infrastructure, some of the times what I'll do is actually go down to a physical VM. I'll do an export or a copy to clipboard, and then I'll go to a different VM and then copy it in. That way I don't have to go back through and actually import all of that stuff back into there. And second step, add, modify, remove permissions from users, groups in the inventory objects. I mean, it's pretty much the same way. As you can see up top, we've got the plus, which is usually the add permissions, as you can see, just popped up. You've got the pencil, which is the change, and you can also do a remove. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my read only. I actually have this user created somewhere else. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the red X. Pops up nice and easily. Do you want to delete the selected permission? As always, we select yes, and that permission's actually been gone. All right. So that takes care of that piece. We'll go on to the next one, which is create, clone, edit vCenter server roles. So what I need to do here is I need to get back to the home. And I need to, looks like I need to go further. Why am I missing? I'm missing something here. Home, roles under, oh, it's under administration, that's why. So I go under my administration and I go into the roles. This was the roles we were talking about, and you also showed back into the drop down. As you can see up top, we have the vCenter, the all vCenter 6. There's ways to go back through and actually create and modify those, but as you can see, all of those are actually very similar from what we're normally used to. So what we're going to do, trying to remember, the first one is a create. So I am missing a step here. All right, sorry about this, guys. For some reason, I mistranslated this across.
No worries.
I know it's here. Why?
I think we've all done this before.
I was going to say, I should have my box up top like I normally do, but I'm not seeing it. All right, fine. And it may be that I just don't have this user set up right. So we go to the good old SSO user, since I'll need it eventually here anyways. Is that right? Yes. I can't imagine that. I would forget the password.
It's just getting better and better.
Yeah, I figured that. It's just going downhill for me. That's all there is to it.
Murphy.
Well, that's normal. I had everything set up and ready to go, going, oh yeah, this should be easy. That's what it was. All right. So give me 3 seconds here. We'll bring it back up. Can't type local today either. Okay, look, it actually works.
Hooray!
That's the only one piece about the web client that I'm still not completely satisfied with, is it doesn't load really quickly when you log in.
So, comment from Graham. That's why you write the admin password down on a post-it note on the screen. As we're talking about security, right?
Wait a minute, hold on. Here's my normal post-it note that sits on my screen. So
there you go.
All right, let's try this again. Wrong one. Administration, roles. Hey, look, I've got it. So I had my permissions screwed up in my user. I'm good with that. Because what I was looking for is that plus button up top. Where did it ever come from? So we'll get back to this of going, okay, let's add a user. Let's add a role in here. So what you can actually do is we'll create just a test role out there. So as you can see going down through, you've got the all privileges, which is basically the administrative role. You can actually go through and be very granular of saying, okay, on an alarms level, what do you want to give them access to? Disable, create, all those fun pieces. So you got a help desk technician that you just want to be able to look at alarms and check those pieces. The auto deploy, this is an interesting piece. With the vCenter 6 install, auto deploy is automatically installed. I haven't really had a chance to play with auto deploy, at least in this environment yet, but that's something I look to do further going on. Certificates is another piece, content library, so you can add the library items, all that fun stuff. So I'll leave the explanations to there. So we'll just do some basic things. Let's say we want them to be able to rename files and move data stores, and we'll go ahead also and give them host profiles of, be able to add hosts and modify clusters. That just gives them enough to get in and actually play a little bit. So we'll just go ahead and we'll create that. As you can tell, it's pretty simple, straightforward. Our test is actually sitting in there waiting. So there was that. Modify is pretty much just the same. I want to basically go through and say, okay, let's take the data store consumer example. Easy enough. So what we'll do is the second button up top says, let's clone this role. So I'm going to go ahead and clone it. But from this piece, I want to name it as caps lock. And this is what I want for my data store admin. I create that piece, and as you can see, if I can find it, data store admin is basically created. So there was the add, there was the add and the modify or the clone, and the next piece comes is it's easy enough to delete. Let's go ahead and hit the edit button so you can see that, hey, it gives you right back. If you made a mistake while you were in there doing it, you can always go back and change. So it's not a finalized thing. So we'll go through now and we'll just delete that, because more than likely I'll come back and delete it in about an hour. All right. Export user groups, modify user groups and permissions, create, clone, edit vCenter server roles. So this is where we're at. What if I go to the next page? All right. Determine the correct roles, privileges needed to integrate vCenter server with other VMware products. It's a lot to do with root administrations and pieces like that. I'm going to read a part here. This is actually taken from the vSphere 6.0 user security guide, and it's actually on page 22 of that guide. It says global permissions are applied as a global root object that spans solutions, for example, both vCenter server and orchestrator. The use of global permissions to give users or group privileges to all objects or objects hierarchies. Global permissions are applied to global root objects that span solutions, as we said again, orchestrator. So we're using those permissions and groups to do the same thing. So users and groups are both used to actually set those pieces. So we need to determine the appropriate set I'm just making sure I'm not on 2.2 yet. Determine the appropriate set of privileges for common tasks in vCenter server. So what I actually did is, I don't have it, but you guys can go out and get it. In that same vSphere 6 security guide, and these are actually on pages 128 through 129, it actually breaks down it even further on what's needed to create a virtual machine, deploy a virtual machine, take a virtual machine snapshot. This is a very nice guide. That way you can actually go through and actually physically create these pieces. And knowing me, I should have actually created a slide with that on it. So that one was my fault. So we'll go back to the slides for 2 seconds. And so that was 1.1. So we'll look at that. We kind of went through the identifying server privileges, how to do permissions, apply them all to vCenter or specific inheritance, view, sort users and groups, modify, remove permissions from inventory objects, create, clone, edit, fine and dandy, determine the roles needed for the integrations, and also privileges for common tasks. So that was kind of the high level of what not one. As an access control, that's probably the easiest piece you'll see on the actual VCP test. So we'll go to 2.1. We're securing ESXi, vCenter server, or virtual machines going down. So what we've got is enable, configure, disable services on the ESXi firewall. That's something that you'll need to know if you plan on going further than the VCP test. Enable the lockdown modes, configure network security policies, add ESX hosts to directory services, which I've already got set up, but we'll show you how that is. Apply permissions to the ESX host using host profiles. Configure virtual machine security policies, create and manage server certificates. And for some reason it's not coming to me, but I know there's a blogger out there that has dedicated many blog posts to actually walking you through step by step on how to get those security certificates to work perfectly.
Derek Seaman.
So we'll go back.
You're referring to Derek Seaman.
Derek Seaman, thank you. That is him. Yeah, I know there's been many times where he's had problems and he's actually wrote blog posts for that. So anything certificate based, he's probably the best authority to go out and read. All right, so let's get back out of this. We'll go into the hosts and clusters piece of this. And let's get into my lab and we'll select a host. So what we'll do is we'll go into the Manage tab then. In the Manage tab, there is also the Settings tab. Hey, look, it's right in front of me. So under the setting, I'm under the system and security policies. That's what I'm looking for. So under here, it has everything. It has the incoming connections on the firewall. So basic pieces, the CIMs, the NVSs, the DNSs, all of this stuff VMware has actually done. So all of these are allowed incoming and outgoing. So the firewall is always running on these. The only pieces that are not enabled, I'll show you here in about 2 seconds. As you can see, vMotion's also in there with the 8,000 ports. Services themselves, this is where we get into, there is the direct UI consoles running, the ESX shell. So the shell is basically when you get into the host itself, which I need to do, and I forgot to bring that one up, so that one may take me a couple seconds. The shell is actually the bash behind the Linux ESX itself. It allows you to actually run commands from the console if you were to happen to have network connectivity problems and stuff like that. By default, VMware disables SSH. It's just a security precaution. As we know with everything, OpenSSH, I believe, was yesterday that reported a vulnerability, so there's good reasons that VMware does that. Everything else in there is basically, if it needs to run, it's going to run. If it doesn't need to run, more than likely you're not going to be able to go in and change it. What I'll do here quick is I'll actually enable a service here quick, then we'll go back through and disable, and then we'll actually look at configuring one. Easy enough. As you can see, the services is right up top. Hit the edit button. Pretty simple. So, like I said, let's go ahead and let's start it. You can see down here that the service status shows stopped. The startup policy you can actually do, you can say, okay, I want to do this start or stop manually. If you're in the middle of a troubleshooting piece, you've got to have that running. It could be for a notorious amount of things, ESX top or something like that, a remote ESX top. You might want to start and stop this with the host. This just depends. It's not a recommendation by VMware. It's recommended to use the manual mode. So we're going to leave it at that, and then we'll actually go ahead and we'll start that. As you can see, a couple seconds later, the started service started, and it would be nice. I'm trying to remember. There it is. So what we'll test here quick. Putty works wonders. The SSH port goes through, and since it went through, you can see that I actually have that with the root password, which we'll leave alone. So we'll go back into the settings just to prove that it wasn't open the first time. We'll go into SSH, and it automatically stopped again. That does not. All right, let's refresh. All right. And that may be a new feature that I haven't seen. I know there is settings on the ESXi that actually says an SSH session can only be open for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. As we get a little bit further in, we'll actually show that. The ESX shells is actually the same. It's a security policy. From my end of it, from what I see, I've actually been in the PCI environment. That's one of the biggest keys that is needed in there, is the ability to turn it off after a certain amount of time. So from a PCI or an SAE16, it's one of those security precautions that you have to actually put into place. So we disabled and configured, and then that. So the next piece that we come down to is actually right below, the lockdown mode. Lockdown mode, as it says, prevents remote users from logging directly to this host. The host will only be accessible through the local console or authorized central administration. Well, we're going to enable it, and hopefully I don't lose my host. So there's a couple pieces here. There's a disable, which says, okay, I'm not doing lockdown mode at all. Normal, which is accessible only through local console or vCenter server. So that means the vCenter stuff should continue to work without any problems. The strict is it's only accessible from vCenter server. There is no direct UI console. So if you were to happen to lose vCenter, it's going to be very difficult. It might actually take a reload. I'm sure there's a KBase out there somewhere that actually shows you how to go into the ESX and actually do that, but that's a little bit higher level than what this VCP course is actually going to do. So we'll actually just go into the normal mode. Hit our OK button. We'll wait for the task to come up, and it actually shows that it's in lockdown mode. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go all the way back out, and we're going to go back in, because sometimes my browser doesn't refresh the fastest. And I want to look, and there was the SSH piece. So we'll stop that here in a second. As you can see, the lockdown mode is now set as enable, and it's set as normal. So that means that it's actually physically sitting there ready to go. And here's another new piece. I just saw that, and I was reading my notes just to make sure. The exception users, this is a new piece with version 6, brand new, and it's kind of interesting in how this works. So basically, you add users to the exception list. The added users to the exception list do not lose their permissions or privileges when an ESX host is set into lockdown mode. So if you have privileges set to be able to do the SSH or other pieces like that, it actually works around that user that's already been set. So the accepted users, if you've got one VMware admin that is almost the go-to for everything, that might be one that you set in exception mode for and say, all right, you can still have it, because if something breaks, you need to get in and make sure that that access is up and ready for him or her. That way you can continue that task. So while we're here, let's go ahead, and we're going to go into the SSH. Now, as you can see, it was showing running, so we're just going to stop it. The other piece that you noticed over here on the right side, when I actually had SSH enabled, there was actually a little bit of an alarm sitting over in the side. It's another one of those security precautions that VMware has put into place and says, hey, you over there, you've got SSH enabled, you truly want it. If a hacker were to get inside and enable SSH and you weren't aware of it, that way VMware says, okay, I'm notifying you. That way you have an idea and can go from there. All right.
Graham says there's a config option to turn that alert off too.
Yes, there is. All right. And the one piece that I forgot, I'm going to work on this one in the background, but it's a direct console user. I'll bring up my KVM here on the back end side while I'm doing stuff. That way we can kind of get through that and not worry about it. So the next thing is actually configuring network security policies. Depending on how you're set up, most environments that I see in a day-to-day business or day-to-day are small, medium, and some very small, large businesses. Most of them don't have the ability to purchase what's called Enterprise Plus in the VMware licensing. So without Enterprise Plus, you have to stay with the vSphere standard switches. If you have the Enterprise Plus, then you can actually go up and actually play with the vSphere distributed switches, which actually gives you more throughput, more configuration options such as NIOC, load balancing, port mirroring. There's a whole bunch more that actually comes into that, and that's kind of a little bit above the scope of the VCP also. So let me get back out. We have networking here, and this one I actually have Enterprise Plus installed on. And as you can see, that's why. The home lab itself only has the VSS, so it really doesn't have much actually configured. So on the standard switches, there's only a couple of security policies that you can actually use. There's MAC address changes. With those known in the Cisco world, if a MAC address changes on that specific port, it actually locks out, I believe in the Cisco world it's called a sticky MAC. So if that changes, it'll actually lock out the port, and it requires a VMware admin or the network admin or whoever's been given access to actually go in and actually remove that sticky. That way that MAC spoofing and pieces like that don't actually occur. There's also a forged transmission, which is set to accept by default. And this is where I break down. And I go back to Old Faithful.
Cheater.
Yes, I know. I am a cheater. I am truly still learning, especially on the web interface. I grew up from 4.0 all the way up to 5.5 on this, so yes, I'm cheating. I just figured this was easier to show. We have the MAC address changes, the promiscuous mode, and then the forged transmission. For the network administrators out there, this promiscuous mode is a requirement if you want to do any tracing of traffic through the network. NetFlow is a big piece. So if you're trying to do NetFlow and pieces like that, especially on the single vSwitches, you're going to have to enable promiscuous mode across. As you can see, by default, it's set as rejected, and that's for a good reason. You don't want to basically turn that vSwitch into a hub. And with the promiscuous mode, that's basically what you're doing. So the forged transmission, I'm going to read the definition because I don't use this one much either. Forged transmission is ESX does not compare the source and the effective MAC address. When set to reject, the ESX host does compare the source and the effective MAC address of the client. If they do not match, the ESX host drafts a packet. So MAC addresses can change. The biggest piece, and I believe this is why VMware does it, is the introduction of VDI. Your MAC addresses on your VDI hosts, or even if you were including orchestrator or pieces like that, those MAC addresses will change constantly. They usually never stay the same. Even running a Windows sysprep will actually rechange that MAC address. So that's something they just go, okay, MAC address changes, we're just going to let go. We're not going to actually truly worry about it. All right, so we go to the authentication services. All right, I'll go back to the web client now. Now, and that was a piece, and when you saw I was messing up and not getting permissions, what I did is I actually went out. The only way to truly add a directory service in is you've actually got to be signed in as the SSO user. I think on 5.5 it was something different, or 5.1 it was like admin at vSphere local or something similar. In the 5.5 and 5, or in the 6.0, it's administrator at vSphere.local. The password is basically set when you actually install vCenter. So that was the password that I was having problems with the sticky note on. So on that piece is if you hit the administration section in here, and we were in here before, you can see the roles, the global permissions. It is actually the single sign-on configuration and then identity sources. As you can see in here, I've already got my Active Directory set up. What I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and I'll pop it up again. We've got a couple of different pieces that we can actually use. The Active Directory integrated Windows authentication, which means that from you automatically log in with authentication to Windows and it just passes it straight through. You can actually set up Active Directory for LDAP, so you can go through and configure the LDAP // name with the port number. Gotta love that stuff. And then you've also got the Open LDAP. I haven't had to use this yet. I've had people that have actually had Macintosh to where they were actually running a version of the Open LDAP. Not fun. And then also the local OS. Now what I'll show you here quick is if we click on the first one, this is interesting. The integrated Windows authentication, all you truly have to do is actually import your domain name. So what it's going to do, it's going to go, okay, here's a domain name. I'm going to use the account that's sitting on the computer that I'm using, and it's going to pass those credentials in. Really simple, really easy. So if you do the LDAP servers, this is when we get into the issue of, okay, now I've got to name it. I've got to find the base DNs, the domain name schemes, which is usually OU equals whatever the OU, comma DC equals first part of the domain, comma DC equals com, org, local, all those fun stuff. I'm going to see if it's got, that's just that. Primary URL, there's the LDAP : / full with the 389 on the back end side of it. Usernames and passwords are basically full domain. As you can see, there's a little bit of there. You can see the CN name is the John Doe, I can't read, and then the example, and then the .com. So easy enough. There's a test connection on this one. On this one, there's not. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll actually look at mine that's already been set up. As you can see, it's pretty simple. Put in my domain, jb.local. I didn't change anything else. All I did was hit the OK button, and it was automatically integrated into my Active Directory. There's not too much to it. With the old 5.5, you actually put into the DN names and all that fun stuff. It usually took me about 25 minutes to make sure that I had my DNs right all the way through to actually get it connected. All right. Host profiles. Yeah, the fun. All right. I'm losing where I'm at again. Imagine that. Home. There it is. I knew I was right where I was supposed to be. Host profiles. I have not set any of these up yet. I'm actually studying for the VCP/DCV, which actually requires my knowledge of host profiles. I haven't got this far into it, but I'll kind of give you a little bit of an overview of my knowledge and what I've learned. So we'll just go ahead and create one really, really quickly. So we'll hit the plus button here. So it's going to go out, it's going to look. I've got 2 that I'm running for Nutanix, don't want to touch those. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to select my host one. We'll hit the next button, host profile. We're just going to name it as default. Don't worry. When I'm being watched is the only time I mistype. As you can see, default profile, pretty much simple to the piece. So now we wait for it's actually extracting that from the settings that are actually sitting in my vSphere 1. Yeah, maybe I should have actually had that done first. All right. Well, we can go through this quick while that's actually sitting there. Finally made it. So the default we'll look at this here quick. It is, no. I don't want to duplicate, I don't want to copy. Okay. I'm just seeing here. All right. Oh, we're just creating security on it. That's why I went too far. Let's go back. Manage. Wait a minute. Manage settings. Edit host profile. That's what I've been looking for. Yes, I'm still new to. I could do this and actually the GUI a lot quicker. So the edit button, host profiles. It's actually exactly, and there's where we get into here's the actual host profiles, like the advanced configurations piece. So there's actually options in here of configurations that we can actually go through and change. Log directories, all log directories will be the same. There's a whole slew of things that are actually, it goes out and actually look at the host and all of this, configurations, networking settings, storage settings, and basically what it tries to do is keep your host as pure as possible. So in a true VMware environment that is next to VMware standards, all your hosts would look exactly the same. As you know, in normal production, that never happens. You have these two hosts that are VDI only. You've got these two hosts that are ESX only. So none of this host profiles, it's good for the set, but it's not good for across the whole vCenter. So we want to expand security. So we've got security settings. Security settings. Yeah, what did I lose? Security and services. Come on. Where's that piece? Security services. Really? Here, we'll just do it in the permission rules here. So what we're doing is we're adding an actual permission rule in here. So we're saying permissions. Imagine that. So either you're requiring a specific rule or a user must have explicit permissions. Basically, you're just going into the host profile, and within here you can actually set security guidelines for your security settings for permissions, rules, your SSH, your user configurations, and pieces like this. It's just giving you a little bit more granularity of how to, okay, in this profile, I only want this set of users to come in and be able to change it, or firewall settings or pieces like that according to these profiles. Let's get out of there before I mess up my profile. We're almost to 1:3. How are we doing for time over there?
So, we got 15 minutes, but like I said, don't rush. Keep going.
1:3 is even longer. So we've got configure virtual machine security policies. And like I said, I'll just kind of take this from, it's another section in the actual lockdown guide. So virtual machine, basically these are the best practices that come out of actually securing. So it says use templates to deploy virtual machines. I mean, that's just a general setting is you don't want 3 million people going out there and installing their own version of 2012 server. Having a template and having your security settings set within the VM guest itself, it's just a good best practice. You want to minimize the use of the virtual machine console as much as possible. In my management career, the console is only needed when you can't get access to it in any other ways. Usually inside most networks that I've had, RDP has been enabled, SSH on the actual configurations. That gives you the access into there. If you get into more secured environments, that may be more of a piece of, okay, now I've got to open up the console. But best practice is try to minimize that use as much as possible. You want to prevent virtual machines from taking over resources. I came from an environment that was very heavy SQL, and memory was a big piece. So you always threw more and more memory at it because the developers always sat there and go, all right, I need more resources. But what you try and do is you try and create the tasks or create pieces to try and not allow it to actually take over all of the resources that have actually been given. Remove unnecessary hardware devices. I'm actually going to show this only because this is one piece that I've actually come across a couple of administrators not long ago that actually had no idea that this was even possible and what I actually truly did. I'm betting that I've already done it here, but we're going to actually take a look. So I'm going to do an edit settings. As you guys know, when a default VMware or a default guest comes up, there's one thing that always shows its mean little head, and it's called a floppy. With the why can't I think of the lab? With the auto lab, the floppy is needed because it's doing an unattend. If this is in a production environment, the floppy drive is something that really truly doesn't need to be here. The guest itself goes out, looks at the floppy drive, checks it, makes sure it's working, and then coming back. You're talking probably about a 2 to 3 second latency there of booting your machine up. So that's floppy drive, try and get that out of there. As you can see, for some reason, I've got a serial port 1 actually in here. What I would do to actually remove that. Serial ports are another one. When you load up a normal VM, I wonder, give me 3 seconds, we're actually going to do it. I haven't started my view up here for a while. I'm going to go into VM options, and here's another piece. There's a BIOS behind all of this stuff. If you want to get in and actually see the BIOS settings, if you go into the settings, the VM options, the boot option, there's a place in here to force it into the BIOS. That means when it boots up, it automatically goes into that BIOS screen.
I'm glad you showed that because most people will remove the floppy and then wonder why they go into the VM and still see the floppy or some of those, right? They didn't disable it in BIOS.
Yep, and I'm going to go in here and show that for that reason. Because I've had administrators that have actually done that. Maybe. All right, it just didn't
actually
come up in time.
Remove it from.
Try that again.
I keep all that done in the template anyway.
Yep. Well, and doing a template, that's where this comes in handy. So for me, I automatically disable the legacy. Get rid of it. It's not needed. Unless you're going to do the auto lab, then please don't touch it because that will cause some issues when you redo your lab. The next piece is the advanced tab has a ton of stuff, but these are the main settings. That main setting with that is the first. Then I usually go into I/O devices. Very rare occasions you're going to use a serial device. Once in a great while you're going to come across a dongle that you need to use, but that's when you recommend to the customer, hey, let's put a digi device in and let's put that on the network. So usually what I do there is I'll go through and actually disable all of those also. The only other piece that I do is I always get rid of the removal devices. That's just habit by me. Usually let it boot from the hard drive first. After that, I do a save changes.
So you actually have a question.
As you can see, it's a 3 second. Okay.
The hard disk access in the BIOS, should it be set to 32-bit or not? Or bot? You put bot.
bot.
Yeah, I think he says bit.
I gotta get back to it. Alright, let's go back. I'm having more problems with my lab than I know what to do with.
That's fun.
That's
Then it
what I get for just upgrading.
becomes a troubleshooting scenario lab.
I'm all okay with that. So let's go back in and let's make sure that we can boot. Because once it boots the first time, it clears that check. So we're going to make sure. As you can see, the check mark has actually been cleared, so we'll create it again. Let it go through its piece. Just to let you guys know, both of these vSpheres are actually based on Chris Wall and I can't remember who the Baby Dragon design. Very small, very lightweight, very quiet. All right, so focus. So the boot, was it in this section? I'm not seeing that 32-bit he was talking about. Trying to see if I can figure out where he was talking. Memory cache. It's chipset. No. Oh, it could be that too. Just access to DOS, which that's fine. Installed OS. I love that Windows 95 is still in there.
He says it's on the main screen.
No primary master.
Yeah, primary master.
All right, so there's the main screen. Well, the primary master, it's always set to auto.
Yeah, I've never changed it.
32-bit I/O. The 32-bit IDE is kind of interesting. It was basically based on the FAT32 days. Why VMware still has it in here, I think it's just part of the Phoenix BIOS. If you're going to go back to the FAT32 days, you're still basically at, what was the limitation, 2 gig? You had to have blocks of 2 gig to actually be able to make it work. So usually, no, I don't play with the 32. I leave it disabled, that way I can use the full disk if that's what's needed. I think especially if you start looking at doing flash arrays, vSANs and pieces like that, you truly do not want to bring that online.
So he even, let's see. So basically, I would leave it alone. I leave it at the default.
Yes.
Because he's asking, so enable or disabled for NTFS. I've left it at the default and haven't had any issues.
Nope. Well, just because I don't care. Just out of curiosity, let's see if 2012 will actually boot with that on. I'm interested. The way it's looking, I'm going, no, it did come. We'll let that sit in the background for a couple minutes. So with that piece, we kind of walk through that of going through unexposed features. A lot of that stuff just depends. There's the ability to disable copy and paste between guest operating systems and remote console. By default, that's been disabled. I know there's ways to get around that to where you can actually copy and paste between this console and your desktop. I look at it from an administrative standpoint. If I truly need something, I know how to use the admin shares. Unless you're a user on the other side, you've got a ton of users, there may be an instance to where you need it. I look at these exams over and over again. Best practices are great and wonderful, but from a design scenario, it's always what's best for the customer. So these are just kind of guidelines to go on. It doesn't mean that you can't bend, if not break, some of these. Prevent virtual machine users from disconnecting devices. modify guest operating system variable memory. A lot of that stuff is all done within the actual template itself. All right. Sure, the tough part. I am actually truly surprised that it booted. I'm actually going to leave that, and I'm going to do some testing offline with that. So we'll leave that one alone, but I may have more to come with that. All right, let's see here. The one piece that I didn't install. Dang it. So I got to skip this part. I'm going to bet we're probably going to go into another night, or do you want to keep me going?
So, I mean, we can go longer if you want. I mean, how much? Doesn't matter.
I'm looking through high-level stuff here just to see what I've got left. Let me just, I'll flip back to the slides here for 3 seconds.
If not, we can always do part 2.
Let me look at 1.3. Configure and manage Active Directory authentication. We've kind of done that. Configure and manage platform services controller. This one may be a little bit more difficult. I mean, I can explain the high-level pieces of this because I've added a couple new pieces into this and embedded an external. It's up to you. It could be long. It could be short also.
How about we get a consensus? Because, I mean, most people may drop off, but that doesn't matter. I mean, it's recorded, so they can always come back and watch the recording.
I'm good with that.
But I don't have an issue. We can keep going if you want.
I guess I'll keep talking then.
All right.
So, yeah, we've already walked through the configure and manage Active Directory authentication in this piece. I'm not even going to go back and look at it. It's pretty easy. As I showed you, there's the multiples between the integration, doing the LDAP piece, and then doing open LDAP or just local piece. Not going to go back over that. The VMware certificate authority, that's a piece that I forgot to install last night. That one I'll probably just touch on a high level. It's actually not installed in my environment. My fault on that one. The platform services, I'll go into a little bit of detail of what these truly are, kind of show you what the pieces are. Then we'll actually look at the enable, disable, single sign-on, and then other pieces that actually come to this. As you guys can tell, there was only 8 slides. So we've gone through that. What I'm going to do is I'll go through basically what PSC is. Platform Service Controller. If anybody was watching tonight, I actually used this part as I was going through this. I actually used it in my design. So those PSCs, what they are is the vCenter single sign-on, the vSphere licensing service, the certified authority, which is the new piece in 6.0. So those 3 pieces are consisted of the platform service controller. Those pieces are kind of the core. If you were to lose a vCenter, that piece would be gone. So that comes to the next piece. They've got 2 pieces for PSC now. We've got what's called an embedded PSC, which everything is embedded in the same virtual machine. This is a normal install of a vCenter. All of that is there. It's all configured. It's right there. The new piece that I've just learned about and configured was what they call external PSC. What you can actually do is deploy vCenter, and then you can go out and deploy another virtual machine and actually install VMware vCenter single sign-on, vCenter licensing service, and the certificate authority. So what you're doing is actually creating yourself a little bit of resiliency. So if the vCenter itself were to fail, you could actually probably stand another one up, connect back into the PSC, and you lost nothing according to your SSO, your licensing, or your authority for your certificates. What I actually had to do was design in 2 locations. So what I did is 2 vCenters on each side. Then I had a load balancer that sat in the middle of it, and then actually 2 PSCs outside. Basically, the only thing the load balancer did was be able to create the interface between the vCenter servers. So when they were actually communicating, they were communicating with the right system that was doing the replication. That's the only reason that there was a load balance server even sitting in there. The big note that VMware says here is once you actually do one, so if you do embedded, which is on the system, or external, you can't change it. It's done. The only way to change it is wipe out your vCenter environment and start over from scratch. That's the only way. So I went through some of these. I'll kind of just read what I've got here. Is the embedded, the connection between vCenter, and this is why an advantage is, it's connection between the PCS and vCenter servers local. You don't have to worry about the network. One of the big pieces. If you install vCenter on Windows, virtual machine, or a physical server, you'll need fewer licenses. So you're not going to have to create another Windows server to be able to bring it up. If you do it on the Linux environment, which is the appliance, that's a different story. There's no licensing involved with that. You'll have to manage fewer virtual machines or physical servers depending on how you do it. You do not need a load balancer to distribute the load across those servers. Hence the reason I brought that up also. Disadvantages, like I said, you could lose everything. And the embedded, it's basically a small-scale environment. If you're looking at a small shop with only a couple of vSphere hosts, you're probably not going to need the embedded. If you're looking across multi-tenancy, across data centers across the world, that's when you're going to come to the external. Advantages of the external: less resources consumed by one physical server. Your environment can consist of more than one vCenter server instance. That was the other piece behind it, is you can have multiple vCenters within the single network because everything is stored on those back-end PSC pieces. Disadvantages: connections between vCenter server. You got network consistency. That's the biggest piece there. You need more Windows licenses. Basically, almost the exact same things. Let me read my fine print here. There's a couple pieces you can actually go out and read some more about. vCenter Server 6 deployment technologies and high availabilities. That's a document where I pulled some of this stuff from. VMware Platform Service Controller 6.0 FAQs. So that was another piece that actually got configured in that piece. So PSC, if you need it, use the external. If it's something that you're just installing in your lab, then more than likely embedded. Even small deployments, I'd recommend embedded also. If you're out there and you've got a lab, test it. See what you can do with the external and see how it actually happens. All right. I'm flipping here. All right. So enable, disable SSO users. We'll do this really, really quickly. We'll go back to the home screen. vSphere client. Yep. Administrative tab. Single sign-in. Fine. Users and groups. And this would be why my administrator doesn't work. All right, we figured that one out. So what we'll do is we'll actually just go in here. We're going to add user. We're just going to add a local user. Pretty simple and pretty easy. I'm just going to come up with a username of test. Nobody knows what the nasty password of password 1 that actually works with Active Directory. Description really doesn't make a difference. So this is creating an SSO user. So the good piece behind this is we understand we have the administrator of vSphere.local. If it were to ever happen, and I hope this upon nobody, if it were to ever happen that your administrator left and you cannot find that password, there is a way to actually reset that password back to a factory default. VMware has a KBase out of there. Fine, we'll leave that. But in all honesty, if it were me, I would create another SSO user. So with this SSO user, I've got a test user that's actually in there as of right now. So now with this user, I can actually log in through the SSO, and I can actually make changes for the identity sources and make those pieces so I can go, okay, this is what I need to do. what we'll do here is we'll flip over to groups, which is part of that piece also. So you've got quite a few different groups here. So you can see solutions users, DCA admins, the VCOs, the AX users, all the fun and dandies of just about all the funds. As you can see beside it, it's got well-known configuration group, can configure users to members, marks user eligible to do delegations, even the orchestrator. With the vSphere 6, orchestrator is actually already sitting there waiting for you to actually tie into. And then you've got your administrative group. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to add the administrative group. How about if I actually go down here and add group members? So what we'll do is we'll look at the vSphere.locals where we were at. We created the test user, hit the add button, and it'll actually put in. Now you actually have 2 users sitting out there that you can actually go in and create, or you can log in with the SSO. So it's just one of those pieces behind going, hey, it's better to be safe than sorry. If I remember correctly, you can also do that via Active Directory. We'll check it. So maybe got away from Active Directory to authenticate. Cool. So you can actually create an SSO user also. So security-wise, I would almost prefer going on the domain side. Hopefully, you never see your domain go down. So me, domain's good, but I would probably also create a secondary just in case something bad were to ever happen. I hope not in anybody's aspect of the word. And that's actually, the identity sources is it. I will talk just a couple seconds here. I'm looking for my page. Where is it? PSC, single sign. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the vSphere Certificate Authority. That's the one piece that I must have forgot to actually install on my piece. So basically, vSphere 6 came out with this piece. When it was started, 5.1, 4, 4.1, you actually had to physically go behind the scenes and create your certificate request with OpenSSL, try and get them to pass into, I'm thinking I'm right, but I'm not for sure, but I'm thinking this web client actually uses Tomcat, if I remember right. I could be wrong on that. But to go in and get Tomcat to view it right, or Apache, or whichever it is, to view it right, being a Windows administrator that I am, Tomcat never agreed with me. Apache, never had any problems with. So that's kind of where I'm getting that synopsis from. So basically, you can create multiple pieces. You can actually create certificates per ESXi. It can be done many ways. If you have a root certificate authority within a Windows Active Directory, those certificates can be done that way through passing them back and forth, creating the advanced configurations. Or if you have a managed PKI that's actually through a bigger CA that the corporation has paid money through, that can also be done on top of that. So what this is the VMCA allows you to create those, but it also allows you to get away from the pieces of the generated from VMware. I'll show you, because this is a VMware certificate that was basically generated. If we look at it, it's a default VMware certificate. As you can see, it comes up and says the issue certificate's not found. So actually creating these certificates either through your custom CA or pieces like this will actually give it the green sign, which I'm thinking this will work. Nope. Got one more. Only because I know they do it. That's just not right. All right, one more try. And it's not, it redirects me back out. So I don't have one, but usually there's a lock up top, basically was what it comes down to. It doesn't have the red X. Depending on the strength of the SSL, it either has a lock or it has green across the whole bar. So just depending on the SSL certificate, it just gives you a feeling of, okay, when I pass my credentials in, it's truly safe. Because I'm sitting here working on my own network, I'm not too worried about it. But there could be pieces to where you're doing replication across LANs or WANs and stuff like that, to where you go, I want my traffic across those to be secured. That's when those pieces actually be coming in. There's
So
also what's called a.
we have a question. Go back to the accounts. The ability not to expire the admin at system domain account.
I knew that question was going to be asked, and I meant to look it up. And for some reason, I forgot. I know there's a way to do it, but for some reason, I'm not remembering off the top of my head. I know it was a big issue with 5.5, because after 90 days it expired. I was going to say, if anybody can pop up and tell me out there, I'm all more for it, because I can't remember off the top of my head.
Is it under configuration?
Let's go look.
That's the password policy, lockout policy.
Password policy, lockup policy. So yeah, it's still saying that's every 90 days.
Yeah, so there you go.
So yeah, you could set that to never. I think there's another way to do it too.
I guess it would just depend on your environment, right? If you are
Correct.
under auditing and things like that, you may want to consider that. For lab environments or POCs, then yes, I typically just put that to a high number or whatever, or try to disable it if possible. There may be a blog post out there. It's been a while.
Yeah, and I'm actually even looking at it too, and I'm not seeing it. There's a lot about the 5.5 when it expired, having to go back through and do it. I'll actually do some more research on that and actually figure that one out.
By the way, if you want to show the green lock, Craig said go to https mail.office365.com.
Perfect. I never thought about that. Nope. Oh, there it goes. It just took a second. Yeah, there's that green padlock. Connection, certificate information. Yeah, it's an RSA 256. The only reason I know this is I come from a PCI background, so I mean it's locked with the true 2048, and you can see all the interesting pieces behind here. And as you can see, it's a semantic, and it's what's called an EV, which is extended validation. They actually physically go out to the domain user to verify this. It's a pain in the butt, but it's very secure. Knowing semantic or what used to be VeriSign, they put a $3 million price tag on saying these EVs are secure. But they also will run you $1,500 a year too. So let's see where I can come back with thumbprints. I know vSphere 5.5 used thumbprint mode. This mode is still available as a fallback option, but it's really, really not used in the 6.0. And there's been some people talking about it that vCenter 6 may have some services that don't work if you actually use this mode with the certificates. So going with that, we'll just kind of stop. I wish I had another screenshot that I could actually show you of that, but I don't. So that's kind of the VMware certificate manager, which is one of the new pieces they added with 6.0 to make making true certificates more of a reality instead of administrative headache. And that's actually the end of 1.3. Yeah, I'm only 15 minutes over. That wasn't actually too bad.
Not at all. You did an awesome job.
Thank you.
So do we have any more questions, comments? Looks like we don't. So Graham says, great walkthrough on the security, so thank you.
Glad to hear that.
I'm actually going to stop the recording.